Warning, adult content, explicit content about drug use and drug treatment, aka trigger warning. Viewer discretion is advised.
Alright, welcome back everyone. This is going to be a very crude video. It's going to be based off of things I've had conversations about already with others, but it's going to be very crude, kind of like punk rock and old school goth rock. I forget this is on mirror image. Ugh. Anyway, that is non-alcoholic. It's carbonated rose-flavored juice. It tastes like champagne, but it is not champagne. It's non-alcoholic. It's interesting. I've never had it before. I thought I'd try it. It's okay. I'm not a big fan of the taste of alcoholic beverages, so when something tastes like an alcoholic beverage, it's not exactly tasty. What's playing in the background is this band, the Alien Sex Fiend album. A song called Wish I Was a Dog. This is the sleeve. I love this sleeve. Yeah. Wish I was a dog. Got no need to be posh. Just keep my lamppost shiny and bright. Anyway, when it gets to the other side of the album, maybe I'll pause and switch it. Maybe I won't. We'll see. I'm going to try to keep this quick. Oh, damn it. So this is going to be about harm reduction. Now, I've had a conversation with a lot of people in the pain community revolving around the fact that opioid medications have pretty much been taken away from us. Not pretty much, they have. And it's been devastating. And I do think that this is true. I don't think pain medications have anything to do with the so-called opiate epidemic. But the fact of the matter is there are people out there that do say they started with opioid medications and then graduated to heroin or street drugs, which what's on the street is now contaminated with fentanyl. And, you know, I'm thinking in my head, what kind of government does this? Okay, so the illegal stuff is contaminated with a very, very potent analog, opioid analog, where it doesn't take much at all to kill a person. And so in our government's infinite wisdom, they say, let's take the safest opioids out of the populace, leaving the population, the society, with the worst and most dangerous ones a person can possibly get their hands on. To me, that makes absolutely no sense. To me, it would make more sense to say, okay, a lot of people are dying from this illicit stuff, the illegal stuff, the stuff on the street, because it's contaminated. So why don't we make it so that if people who have opiate use disorder can go to a primary care physician or psychiatrist and get access to the opioids that are controlled and regulated? This will significantly reduce overdose and death rates because they're not contaminated. You'll be able to control quality and dose. We'll know exactly what the person's taking as far as milligram dosages per day. The other thing, this is one thing about, like, America is doing harm reduction wrong. Suboxone and methadone. These are two of the worst opioids you could get your hands on. Suboxone and methadone have a very, very long half-life. The withdrawals from Suboxone and methadone can last 6 months, and some people even say they don't feel normal until an entire year. That's a long time. Tramadol, hydrocodone, oxys, whether it's oxycodone or Oxycontin, and Percocet, even morphine pills, they do not, even heroin does not have a withdrawal period of 6 months to a year. It's Suboxone, methadone, and fentanyl. Heroin that is not contaminated with fentanyl has a withdrawal period of about a week. So part of the thing that I think should be done as far as harm reduction here in America, and we'll never see it here in America because we're America, they have done this in other countries, is they offer the opioids that they give to chronic pain patients to the people who are heroin users. The idea behind that is, well, let's replace, because there are countries that have the death penalty for sales and use, still people use and sell. Jailing doesn't work. Forced rehab doesn't work. None of this stuff works. Okay, so we've established we cannot stop people from using. Doesn't matter what you do. In fact, putting them in jail or forced rehab is actually really dangerous, because then they start hiding it from people, and you don't know that they're using. And their tolerance lowers, and then they go back to a dose that they're familiar with, and that is now too much, and they overdose and they die. This is actually a very common occurrence. This is a problem. People they don't quit until they're ready to. So this whole like, oh, you need to get clean, go to rehab, we're going to put you in this, we're going to do that, we're going to do just all this stuff that we're basically forcing them against their will to get clean. All that does is it teaches them they can't trust you, that if they fall off the wagon, they're not going to tell you, because you're just going to force them into that stuff that they don't want to do. And so when they come out, they're like, oh, yeah, I'm totally clean, yeah, uh-huh. No, they're just doing it when you're not looking, and they're not telling you anymore, and now they're using alone, and they're using doses that they're used to using, which were really high doses, not taking really into account that their tolerance is lower, and that's where they overdose and die, and you're like, oh my god, they haven't picked up their phone in a week, what happened? They overdosed. And you were like, how could they? They were clean, they were doing so good. No, they weren't clean. You just thought they were. You can't force a person to get clean. You can't. So what can we do? Well, we can make it safer. We can make it safer for human consumption, public health and safety kind of aspect. So what other countries have done is they offer the medical grade supply that we have access to them, to the heroin users, to the street users, to those with opiate use disorder. That way the doctor can manage and maintain their addiction. It's safer because it's controlled and regulated. So, if they're getting a codeine pill, it's not going to have fentanyl in it. It's not going to have medical grade heroin. It's not going to have morphine in it. It's just going to be codeine. And if it says 30 milligrams, it's not going to be 50 milligrams. It's not going to be 10 milligrams. It's going to be 30 milligrams. Maybe give or take like point something on that, but that's really kind of irrelevant. And here's the other aspect of this. This model that I'm painting, not only would it be beneficial for people with OUD, people who are struggling with heroin addiction or addiction to street opioids or opiates, it would also benefit chronic pain patients, because we'd still have access to our opioid pain medication, and the people with OUD, opiate use disorder, would have access to an opioid that has a far less chance of killing them. And like I said, it will also be monitored and sort of overseen by a medical care provider. This is the other thing that bothers me, is this whole, in America, if you have opiate use disorder or any kind of addiction, it's like, oh, report to this clinic. And that's where they give you the Suboxone and methadone, which I've talked to heroin users who even tell me this stuff is worse than what I was using on the street, because it is. 6 months to a year of withdrawal, that is insane. The reality is that the medications, the opioid medications that they give to chronic pain patients, they could absolutely be used to treat OUD. If somebody, they don't need to go to a special clinic and be, I'm not saying, like, for people who use Suboxone or methadone, if that works for you, I'm not saying that should be taken away and that shouldn't be an option on the table. I'm saying you shouldn't have to go to a clinic for that. You should be able to go to your primary care physician and just have that done. Why not? This is ridiculous. But as I was saying, the pain medications they give to chronic pain patients, those can also be used to treat opiate use disorder and heroin users, even if they're on the contaminated fentanyl. All they have to do is establish an average daily milligram dose, and every doctor that has ever prescribed an opioid for pain, pretty much all of them, they're all trained and know how to taper you off. Even psychiatrists are trained on tapering, slowly going down in milligram dosage, bringing the person off of the drug so they don't experience any withdrawals, or very, very little, if any. And they can use tramadol, hydrocodone, oxys, and Percocets, and even morphine pills to do that. They don't need to use Suboxone and methadone. They don't need to. They can use those other 5 that I've mentioned. In the countries where they've been doing this, not only have they seen a significant, like, the places that offer the medical grade heroin to those who use heroin, so there's a medical clinic, they go and they sign up, and then they get a daily dose of their medical grade heroin, and that keeps them from going through withdrawals, that gives them their fix. No one has died. No one's overdosed. No one. We expected in doing this that on top of overdose deaths going down, that the spread of certain diseases that are associated with needle sharing would also go down, which happened. That went down as well, but there was a surprise. Crime rates went down. And so the social scientists in those areas started asking, well, that's interesting. Why is it that when we give them basically legal permission to medical grade opioids, crime rates go down. Well, we found out. Well, the reason why is because they stopped stealing and committing crimes to support their habit, because they can just go to the medical, I call them doc in the boxes, their medical, the clinic, and get it, a medical clinic, just a regular medical clinic, not a special clinic for addiction, just a doctor. So crime rates go down, on top of death rates from overdose going down, on top of diseases from intravenous needle sharing go down. On top of that, they have a higher success rate of somebody who wants to get clean actually getting clean and staying that way. There's this relief of taboo like that's gone away, and so the patient can be more comfortable talking to their doctor about struggling with addiction and not being afraid that the doctor is going to write on their medical report opioid use disorder and send that off to your local law enforcement agency, which is what they do here in the United States. If you have OUD on your medical file, your local law enforcement agency, and actually all law enforcement agencies, it's transferable across state lines, including federal law enforcement agencies, have access to that bit of information. And it's not just opiate use disorder, it's any substance use disorder. Okay? Talk about, an authoritarian state. United States is more authoritarian than we like to think sometimes. It's very, very dictatorship at times. The fact that our doctors have to act like extensions of the law enforcement agency is not something, I don't care if you're on the left or, well, there are right-wingers that would want this because they are in love with dictatorships for some reason. But typically, I don't care if you're on the left or the right. Nobody should want that. Nobody should want their doctor to be an extension of the DEA or the DOJ of law enforcement agency, both local and federal. Nobody should want that. That is police state, surveillance state, dictatorship type stuff. We shouldn't want that. In fact, getting the government out of our doctor's office in general would not only benefit people with substance use disorders of any kind, chronic pain patients, it would also benefit trans people. It would also benefit women and their reproductive care. This is a win-win if we can get that done. So there's absolutely no reason, if somebody has opiate use disorder, you should 100% be able to report to your primary care physician and say, I've been, and maybe they already know because you told them for health reasons so that they're aware of it, because, when they test for lipids and liver secretions and all that, you do your physical and they do the blood work, that might be some important information for them to know that, hey, I use heroin, hey, I use cocaine, hey, I use meth, hey, I use marijuana, hey, I use an abundant amount of alcohol, then, your liver secretions are going to be very important to them. Same with acetaminophen, it's all that stuff. But there's no reason you shouldn't be able to go to your primary care physician and say, hey, maybe you're a chronic pain patient, you've been using opioids, and you say, I've become, I don't want to take these anymore, and I can't just stop because I have physical withdrawals. Can you taper me off? Same with somebody with OUD. They should be able to go to their primary care and say, hey, I've been using heroin for this many years. Give the UA, give the blood work or whatever, and tell them what your use was and say, I'm tired of it, I'm ready to get off. And so they establish that milligram dosage, and then they can taper you down using something as simple as going from Percocet to Oxy to Hydros to Tramadol. Maybe not Tramadol, probably stay on that Hydro and lower the dose and then stretch the time out and then eventually off. And no withdrawals. None. And you can just walk away. Fine. There's no reason we can't do that. Or hey, if you want to go the route of Suboxone or Methadone, I don't entirely agree with it. I think graduating down, going from the heroin to, let's say, like morphine to Percocet to Oxys to Hydros, I think that's a better model. But if Suboxone or Methadone is what really works for you, I think your primary care physician should be able to do that and taper you off as you see fit. There's no reason we can't do that. There's absolutely no reason. This is something we could do. In fact, other countries that I would like to see some policies they have there emulated here in the United States are already doing this. And they're not having the problem that we are here in the United States with the opiate epidemic. It's working out actually quite well. And some of these countries, like you can use substances in those countries pretty openly and pretty freely without being harassed, without worrying about going to jail, without worrying about being forced into rehab and all this other stuff. That if you did it over here, not only would you be a social pariah and treated like crap. I mean, some states here will arrest you for calling the ambulance on somebody who's overdosing, even if you weren't using, but just because you were in the same room. Like, let's say, back when my brother was alive, I knew he was overdosing, and I went over to his apartment and went in there, was like, oh my God, I gotta revive him, called the ambulance to save his life, even though I wasn't using with him, and even though I'm trying to save his life because he's my little brother, I could have been arrested. And then as soon as they revive him and he's okay, he doesn't get to leave the hospital and just go home. He gets to leave and he gets arrested and he has to go to prison. This is a completely dysfunctional system. It doesn't work. It's very, very harmful. In fact, one of the reasons I'm quite convinced of why my brother OD'd a long time ago, this was before the fentanyl issue, fentanyl was contaminated and everything. He told me if he OD'd, he would not seek help. And I said, why not? He said, because I don't want to go to jail. So, thanks for that system. Thanks for that society. I really appreciate that. Maybe if it wasn't such a taboo social pariah thing, and people recognize, like, substance use is not a criminal behavior. And if somebody's going to do it, they need access to things that help them, that not only help them combat addiction when they're ready to quit, but also significantly decrease the likelihood of overdose death. And perpetuating a social pariah and stigmatization that forces them, that causes them to hide, that is not helping. That makes it more likely that it's going to happen. Threatening them with penalization doesn't make things better. It just makes them, again, hide it and makes it more dangerous and more likely that they're going to die from it. Not allowing them access to a controlled and regulated opioid is going to increase their risk of overdosing and dying. Giving them access to an opioid that's controlled and regulated is going to reduce that risk. And here in the United States, for some reason, we decided, let's get rid of the safe stuff. The stuff that's controlled and regulated. The stuff that has a withdrawal period of only 2 days to 1 week. That's right. You heard what I said. A withdrawal period of 2 days to 1 week. That's what they took. And now the only opioids left in society is the illegal, the heroin, which by itself is only a week of withdrawals. But heroin is very different than the medications you get. I know that's not what you hear from the anti-opiate people, but trust me, it's different. Heroin, it lasts about 8 to 9 hours, and as soon as it wears off, you go straight into withdrawals. Not every opioid does that. A lot of opioids, you don't go into withdrawals until maybe 24 to 48 hours after your last dose. Heroin, you pretty much have to have an opiate in your system at all times, or you're going to have withdrawals. And the withdrawals from heroin tend to be extremely intense. Muscle spasm, probably because there's opavine and thebaine in it. You're dealing with more raw opiate instead of like the pure codeine or morphine without having, like, because there's 47 different alkaloids and some of them have longer half-lives. So the thing is with some of the other alkaloids in the opium poppy, they're not like codeine and morphine, which are your painkillers. They do stuff that can mess with your heart. So you might have muscle contractions, shakes, convulsions. Your entire body will ache. You might have vomiting and diarrhea, along with hot and cold flashes, sweats, and a runny nose. A lot of your opioid medications, the withdrawal symptoms usually tend to be nothing more than hot and cold flashes and some sweats. And they may not kick on for maybe 24 to 48 hours after your last dose. They only last 2 days to 1 week, depending on which one you were on. Like the morphine tends to be more on the week longevity, and your codeine tends to be more on like a 2 to 3 day. So on top of that, so then you have the illicit fentanyl that we're finding in all kinds of stuff. We're finding it in crack. We're finding it in cocaine. They've even found it on drug cartel marijuana. What we think is happening now, what our understanding is, the drug cartel are not specifically putting this in the drugs. And what's happening is it's being pushed over here like all the other drugs, the fentanyl. And it's what we're thinking is a lot of drug dealers, they're putting it in the illegal marijuana or the cocaine that's turned into crack too, to make it more addictive. The other darker side of street drugs is that if you sell a street drug in the street world and it kills somebody, a lot of the long-time users that have high tolerance, they will go to that dealer because they go, oh, they got the good shit, and their business increases. So by offering the controlled and regulated, that all goes away. Okay, but we're talking about what's left. So you have the heroin, the illegal fentanyl that is contaminated the heroin. Then you have your Suboxone, which they're giving to chronic pain patients now. They're not just using it to treat opiate use disorder, which has a 6 month to a year withdrawal period. And methadone, which is 6 months to a year withdrawal period, as opposed to 2 days to 1 week. And fentanyl also has a 6 month to a year withdrawal period. Fantastic. Why did we remove the safest and leave the worst ones you could possibly get your hands on? Why did we do that here in America? Why do we do this stuff? That doesn't make any sense. And somebody quoted to me a death toll from this cute little revisioned prohibition that we're doing. And for any leftists out there, I've already explained this because I know a lot of leftists are like, oh, but profiting off of addiction. Yeah, I know that's bad, but guess what? We live in a very hyper-aggressive capitalist society. So going to the safer opioids, they are safer. And yes, they are addictive, and they can be used to taper people off. Somebody's going to be profiting because we live in America. We live in the United States. And it's a very, very aggressive, hyper-capitalist country with a lot of crony capitalism in it at the moment. So, no, it's not going to be socialized. This can be done. And in fact, the countries that I'm talking about where they do have this, what I'm talking about, where you just walk into your primary care and they can use the medications they give to chronic pain patients to taper you off, the countries that are doing that, they're more socialist than us. This can be done with a non-profit model. This can be done with a non-profit model. But we live in the United States. So it's going to be done with a profit model, whether you like that or not. Even Narcan, it's going to be a profit model. One of the things that would, again, significantly help is getting Narcan sold over the counter. There's no reason not to. It's not something that you can get high off of or anything like that. There's no reason to sell that behind the counter and only with a prescription. No reason. Sell it over the counter. Save people's lives and stop arresting people for saving people's lives. You want to talk about the death rate? Why is the government making it harder and harder to save lives and easier to let them die? This is what we did during the alcohol prohibition. So Chick Micken brought up this number to me. He said 78,000 in 1 year died from opiate overdose. And I asked, was that pain meds or illegal opioids? Because right now it is very, very, it doesn't matter how much of a chronic pain patient you are, what kind of condition you have. It is really, really, really hard to get opioid medications to treat pain right now. And a lot of people are suffering and even dying from it. Because you can die from chronic pain. You can die from tachycardia and bradycardia. Your blood pressure goes up when you're in pain. Your central nervous system can become overwhelmed by pain. Pain relief in certain instances pain relief from opioids in certain instances can be the difference between life and death. To give you enough pain relief to get to a medical hospital to get fixed up and survive that incident or not. Yes, that's the truth. Gabapentinoids, Lyrica, gabapentin, the tricyclics that they prescribe, SSRIs, SNRIs that they try to prescribe, and even the antipsychotics, which I don't know why you would do that, but those things that they try to use to treat chronic pain, they're not going to do that. You need a true painkiller, an opioid, and that can be the difference between life and death. You take the opioid, in certain circumstances, you take the opioid, you'll survive long enough to get into medical hands and be able to survive. In that same event, if you're given a gabapentinoid or a tricyclic SSRI, SNRI, or antipsychotic, you're not going to make it. You're going to die. So a lot of people are suffering because pain meds have been taken away from those who use them in a medicinal form, a utilitarian. So people with OUD who are using heroin on the street, that is recreational use. Chronic pain patients are using utilitarian. And we need to understand that difference, the difference between utilitarian and recreational, non-utilitarian. We need to stop looking at them in the same light. Because when somebody says, has been taking opioids for a long time, and they're like, you know what? My pain is managed really well today. Normally I take a pain med, but I'm going to save it for another day. I don't think that person has OUD, and we should stop punishing them. And whether you use it recreational or utilitarian, there are people who use it responsibly, and there are people who use it irresponsibly. Either way, it goes either way. So the only opioids we have, though, that's left in society are the worst ones you could possibly ever get your hands on. They have the worst amount of side effects, the worst amount of long-term effects, and the worst withdrawal. And the ones that have the least amount of side effects, the least amount of long-term effects, and the least amount of withdrawal period, we have taken away. And we've made it almost impossible to seek help without getting penalized for it, or save someone's life without being penalized for it. And then I'm told we live in a free country, that America is bestest. Why are we doing this? Oh, the number. 78,000, Chick Micken quoted to me. 78,000. Okay, let me tell you about alcohol prohibition. 99,000. 98 to 99,000. See, that 78,000 was a year. 98 to 99,000 in alcohol prohibition, a day. And the government did the same thing. They took away the safe supply of alcohol back in the 1920s, and they left the population with the worst supply. In fact, they even poisoned, the government during that time poisoned its own people. It let certain alcohol be used for industrial purposes, but the stipulation was that alcohol had to be poisoned with things like lead. There was the three types of poisons they use. I remember the lead. I don't remember the other two. And they did this in hopes that people wouldn't use it. They did. They used it. So the government was literally poisoning its own population during that time. People were dying from lead poison. People tried making alcohol from wood, which creates formaldehyde, and that killed a lot of people too. There was a lot of hooch followers that killed a lot of people. And like I said, because of that prohibition, the government took away access to the ability to make safe alcohol and left the population with alcohol supply for industrial use that they deliberately put things like lead in it. Poison. And a lot of 98 to 99,000 a day. Not a year. A day. It's so ridiculous that not only are we repeating history, we're repeating history that's barely even 100 years old. That's embarrassing. My fellow leftists, we should not be supporting this. This is just a continuation on the war on drugs. And to my fellow chronic pain patients, I know we want to say that, and I agree, but look, if you sit there and say, opioid medications have nothing to do with the opiate epidemic, the fact of the matter is when we interact with the general public, there are people that do say that say opiate medications do play a part, or some outright find them responsible for it. The fact of the matter is the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, is going to be brought up. And as chronic pain patients trying to get our medications back, if we're unwilling to address that, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And we're hurting ourselves. This is not going to be like arguing for legal marijuana, and look where that's at. Okay, marijuana is harmless shit. I don't care what anyone says, it's not addictive. I've had people tell me it's addictive. I have stopped all kinds of, I've smoked massive amounts of weed and not smoked massive amounts of weed off and on throughout my life. I've never ever experienced anything that I would call addiction. Like maybe like if you're smoking large amounts of weed and then you suddenly stop, you might have trouble sleeping for a few nights, but that goes away pretty quick. I don't usually crave like I do with nicotine or caffeine. Back in the day in my early 20s when I did meth is like it's a mental withdrawal. It's a mental addiction, like nicotine. Only times like a million. You become very, very irritable and agitated. Anytime you hear a reference or see meth, you have deep, deep, deep cravings. Very, very irritable. Very irritable. And it can take 7 years to get over that craving for it. It's a mental addiction, like nicotine. And nicotine, that craving can last the rest of your life. You could have been off of cigarettes for 20 years and still from time to time go, I really want a cigarette. I have tried cocaine and crack in my life. I've never gotten addicted to it. I don't know that it is addictive. I think people just like it because it's fun. That it does produce like a rush of dopamine. I have panic and anxiety disorder, so stimulants don't really sit well with me. Like to me, cocaine is really just powdered anxiety. It's not fun. And crack is basically just a rock version of that. I've never experienced an addiction to it, so I couldn't tell you if it's physical or mental. And I've done lots of it. I'm able to walk away from it just fine. And in fact, be very grateful of walking. Like I said, it's just powdered anxiety to me. I also don't really care for meth either. It exacerbates psychosis, which why on earth would you want to have psychosis? Alcohol addiction is intense. If you become physically dependent on it, the withdrawals can kill you. A lot of people think this is the case with opioids. That is not the case. I mean, you would have to be on some horrendous type of opioid for that to be the case, and it'd probably be more on the 47 alkaloids from the opium poppy rather than anything else. It's the withdrawal from those alkaloids, not codeine or morphine, that would do that to you. Typically, opioid withdrawals do not kill a person. They just make you feel sick for a while. Like I said, if you do just stick to the medical grade, it's only going to be like 2 days to a week. And aside from Suboxone and methadone. So, LSD, mushrooms, they don't tend to be addictive in any sense. You don't develop a mental addiction. Like you don't have like the cravings and the irritability. You don't have physical withdrawals. The only aspect there is to hallucinogens is like, that's really fun, I want to do it again. That's it. There's no mental withdrawals, there's no physical withdrawals. Like if you don't get it, it's just kind of like, oh man, that sucks. Oh well, it's not that big of a deal. That's how I kind of view weed too. So caffeine is extraordinarily addictive. Have you ever seen somebody go through caffeine withdrawals? Very irritable, massive migraines, trouble sleeping. They look like they haven't showered or slept in a week, even if they have. Like their hair will be all greasy and stuff. And because that's a societally prescribed addiction, we've turned the withdrawal symptoms of coffee into a walking joke. Don't even talk to me until I've had my coffee. Ha 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 ha. Yeah, that's funny. It's addiction. Get it? It's very funny. So I don't know why society does these things, but when it comes to opioids, it does tend to be a physical withdrawal. And I think that this is what makes it so hard to quit, is because it makes you feel so sick that it's hard to function, and then society keeps pushing you, go, 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 do stuff, do stuff, do stuff. And it's like, I need to take a moment. If you're not going to taper me off, I need to take a moment and withdraw. I'm going to be out for a week. That's what John Lennon did. That's how John Lennon got clean. He locked himself in his apartment for a week and just went through the withdrawals. Just, and got it done and over and out of the way. But I think that that's what makes it hard, is the physical sickness. So if you can taper someone off, their likelihood of staying clean is much, much higher. It doesn't tend to have that mental addiction like with nicotine and meth where you're like, if I don't have it, I'm going to go insane. No, it's a person can very easily walk away from it and be like, no, I don't want to touch it. Easily. I've seen it. Been there, done that, lived it. I have lived that. So, things to consider. Why are we doing what we're doing here in the United States? I don't know. It's a continuation of the war on drugs. It's just a continuation of prohibition. It's uniformity and conformity. Everyone in society has to behave, act, and do a certain thing. Here's your prescribed substances you can use. These substances you can't use because someone has arbitrarily decided that they don't like them because they hated them for some reason or another. And everyone has their reason. But no one can really seem to explain, how is using a substance a crime? There's a lot of things we do out there that can kill us. So don't give me that excuse. Don't sit there cocking your gun and telling me, oh, but opioid addiction can kill you. Well, it will kill you only if you use it in excess irresponsibly. As long as you don't take too much, it probably isn't going to kill you. Actually, not even probably. As long as you don't take too much, it's not going to kill you. And I am not encouraging people to use. Let me be very, very clear on that. I am not encouraging anyone to use. I am just saying the way that we are handling this in this country is bad. It is designed, it's meant for failure. It's not going to work. And the way that I hear politicians talk, they talk about getting aggressively more authoritarian and dictator-like and police state. And it's depressing. It's depressing watching a country that's called free become anything but that. Consuming a substance is not a crime. Raping someone is a crime. Murdering someone is a crime. Assaulting someone is a crime. Molestation is a crime. There's an actual victim that didn't ask for it, that isn't wanting. Somebody who's using drugs, there are people who are using drugs that want to get off. There are people using drugs that are like, no, I'm perfectly... As I said to a police officer I used to date, when I lit up a cigarette, he said, how long have you had an addicted personality? Probably your whole life, huh? I looked at him and I said, I do not have a problem with addiction. I'm perfectly comfortable with my addictions. You have a problem with my addictions. I'm fine with them. That's my response to that. And that's how it should be. And, if you start offering, if we as a country start offering a safe supply to people with an opiate use disorder, the drug cartel are not going to have really much way of doing business here. Something to consider. And my fellow leftists, until we proclaim a socialist paradise, I'm sorry, but everything is going to cost money and somebody's going to be making a profit. The thing that my fellow leftists need to realize is that the opioids were the cheapest and most effective. And now it's gone. And the things that are left are so mind-blowingly expensive. And I'm medically abandoned. I cannot afford $2,000 a week. Controlling and managing my pain without opioids cost me pretty much what it would cost, like in 6 months. 6 months. I could have bought a car with that money. I could have put a down payment on a house with that money. That 6 months of opioid-free pain management cost me more money than my decompression surgery, which they gave me opioids for the pain afterwards for. My opioid medications only cost me between $20 to $30 for a month's supply. Okay? When you go opioid-free pain management, you're talking about $2,000 a week. Can you afford that? I can't. I can't afford that. And this is also causing a lot of people that normally otherwise wouldn't go to the streets and seek out something like heroin to do so. So, if you really want to help people, if you really, really care about these people, if you care about your vets, your war vets, if you care about the people who are struggling with opiate use disorder, if you care about chronic pain patients, we need our safe opioids back. And to the rest of my chronic pain people out there, look, we need to talk about harm reduction, because this is going to be an uphill battle. I argued for legalizing marijuana, I think, since I was roughly about 15, 16 years old. I've been arguing that. And that what felt like an uphill battle. Opioids, way more taboo than marijuana. We have to have this conversation. And it will not only benefit us, it will also benefit the people who are struggling with opiate use disorder. As they call it now, opiate use disorder. I just say opiate use or opioid use or addiction. I mean, back when I used, I just called myself a junkie for 1.5 years. And that was in my mid-20s, and I walked away from it because I didn't like the physical withdrawals. It goes against the narrative we're taught. Supposedly the person is not supposed to be able to do that, but apparently I'm a unicorn. I shouldn't exist, yet here I am. There's something very, very wrong in medical science when a human being that isn't supposed to exist exists. Okay? We need to do harm reduction properly here. Harm reduction. Otherwise, we're going to continue seeing these death rates. Yeah. And this is going to be an uphill battle to argue for chronic pain patients. And this sucks because, take it from me as a chronic pain patient, being able to take opioids to manage your pain improves your functionality for me by 40-50%. And the one thing, like, I've tried everything else, I've exhausted all other options, and the one thing that works for me is the one thing I'm not allowed to have. That is very, very, very frustrating and very irritating. And it's the case for a lot of chronic pain patients. Some of them, this is very sad, some of them it's the difference between long-term care facility hospice care and maintaining their independence. Some of them it's the difference between being bedbound and being able to walk. So yeah, it's very, very irritating that this is happening. Very, very irritating. That profit or being against someone profiting is what's ruining, completely devastating, killing, causing people, just ruining and causing suffering to people's lives. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable. Yeah. There's no reason you cannot go to your primary care physician and say, I'm addicted to this. Can you help me get off of it without being turned into a criminal and a social pariah? Anyway. Like, share, subscribe, and comment. Sorry it's such a crude video. Just trying to do this as quickly as I can off the top of my head. I mean, all of my videos are off the top of my head, but I mean, I usually have some kind of idea of like an order that I want to go in on topics or talking points. This, I'm just doing it like punk rock music. These are all the things I've brought up are things that I've had conversations with people about, and even social workers, and they agree with me that this is how it should be done. They agree. So, I'm out. I would also like to remind people to check out the description in the video for a bunch of links to various studies on harm reduction and things that they have done in different countries that have worked, as well as other helpful links and people who have been prominent voices in the fight for chronic pain patients' rights to pain management. Wow.